Hello, and welcome to Night Drive Stories. My name's Jack, and I drive the silent highways of the Pacific Northwest long after midnight, picking up those who wander these misty roads. Tonight, let me tell you the story I heard from the stranger I picked up just outside the old shuttered truck stop just east of Snoqualmie Pass, where the fog hangs so thick it feels like you're driving through the clouds themselves. But before, if you like these eerie stories about the lost wanderers I meet along the way, remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel. The woman emerged from the swirling fog like a ghost, her thumb half-heartedly extended into the glow of my headlights. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with tired eyes that seemed to hold a story much older than she was. When she climbed into my cab, she brought the chill of the night with her, along with the faint scent of desert dust and ozone. She introduced herself as Sarah, and after a few miles of watching the pines slip by in silence, she began to talk. Her voice was low and steady, a strange calm layered over a tremor of deep-seated fear. "You ever owned something?" she began, her gaze fixed on the hypnotic rhythm of the wipers. "That felt like it owned you instead." I nodded, keeping my eyes on the road, more often than I'd like to admit. "What kind of something are we talking about?" She let out a short, hollow laugh. "A car. A 1974 Mercury Montego, sky blue. My great-aunt Alara left it to me. They called it the Bluebird." And then she told me her story. It started, as these things often do, with a death. A great-aunt I'd never met, Alara. My mother's side of the family is a fractured thing, full of people who walked away from each other and never looked back. The name Alara was only ever spoken in hushed, cautionary tones, usually followed by phrases like, "took a strange turn," or "went out to the desert and got lost in her own head." She was the family ghost story, the relative who chose the void over us. All I knew was that she was a recluse who had moved to the middle of nowhere in Nevada decades ago and slowly, deliberately, severed every tie. When the lawyer called, it was a shock. More shocking was that she had left me something, her only possession of any real value, he'd said, his voice dry as dust. The car. My job is peculiar. I'm a freelance archivist. I go to small towns, historical societies, sometimes even private estates, and I digitize records. It suits me. I've never been good at putting down roots. I prefer the company of ghosts on paper to most people. A month after I inherited the car, a job came up that seemed too perfect. The town of Oak Haven, Nevada, needed someone to process the municipal records of a neighboring mining settlement that had gone bust in the 80s. The pay was surprisingly good, almost suspiciously so, and it came with a long-term rental at the only motel in town. It was deep in the Basin and Range province, 100 miles from anything you'd call a city. It was Alara's territory. It felt like synchronicity, a sign. So, I packed my bags, loaded my gear into the Bluebird, and drove east. The car was immaculate. You wouldn't think a 50-year-old vehicle could look and feel so new. The sky blue paint was flawless, the chrome gleamed without a speck of rust, and the interior smelled faintly of vinyl and old paper, not of decay or mothballs. The drive out to Nevada was the first long trip I took in it. On the open highway, it handled like a dream, a heavy, solid boat of American steel. But there was a feeling it gave off, a sense of patience, like it had been waiting for something. For me, the engine didn't so much roar as it did hum, a deep, resonant thrum that you felt in your bones, a vibration that seemed to tune itself to my own heartbeat. Sometimes I'd swear the radio would find a station playing a strangely appropriate song just as a thought entered my head. But I dismissed it as coincidence. Oak Haven was just as the ad described, a handful of streets clinging to life at the edge of a vast, empty expanse. The motel was called the Dusty Star, a U-shaped building with a flickering neon sign that cast a sickly pink glow, making the dusty parking lot look like the surface of Mars. My room was clean, anonymous, and smelled of bleach and despair. The archive was in the basement of the old town hall, a cramped space filled with cardboard boxes that smelled of silverfish and thyme. For the first week, life settled into a rhythm. I'd wake up, get watery coffee at the town's only diner, work in the dusty silence of the archive until my eyes burned, and then drive back to the motel as the sun bled out across the horizon. painting the desert in shades of bruise purple and orange. I loved those drives. With the windows down, the air would turn cool and smell of sagebrush and distant rain. I'd usually find a spot a few miles out of town to just park, lean against the hood of the Bluebird, and watch the stars come out. The sky out there is like nothing else, a spill of diamonds on black velvet. It feels ancient and indifferent. It makes your own problems feel small, insignificant. That's what I was doing the night it happened for the first time. I'd finished a particularly grueling day of scanning brittle land deeds. My brain felt fuzzy with fatigue. I drove out to my usual spot, turned off the engine, and leaned back in the driver's seat, intending to just rest my eyes for a minute before heading back. The vinyl seat was cool against my skin. The humming silence of the desert night pressed in, a silence so deep it felt loud. The next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by the crunch of tires on gravel. My eyes snapped open. The car was moving. Not on the paved road, but bumping along a dirt track I didn't recognize. The moon was high, casting long, skeletal shadows from the sagebrush. My heart hammered against my ribs. I sat bolt upright, my mind thick with the cobwebs of sleep. My hands weren't on the wheel. My feet were flat on the floor. The key was in the ignition, in the on position, but I hadn't turned it. The engine was running, that same deep, steady hum, a sound that now felt sinister. The steering wheel was turning slowly, deliberately, a quarter turn to the right, then back to the left, navigating the ruts in the road with a calm precision that was utterly terrifying. I grabbed the wheel. It felt alive. There was a gentle but firm resistance, like trying to wrestle with a sleepwalker. It didn't fight me, but it wouldn't yield either. It simply continued its course. I slammed my foot on the brake pedal. Nothing. It was like pressing a dead sponge. The car just kept gliding forward, its headlights carving a tunnel through the darkness. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I yanked the key from the ignition. The engine died, the headlights cut out. The car rolled to a silent stop. I was plunged into absolute darkness and silence. For a moment, all I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of my own heart. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The flashlight beam sliced through the black, revealing a narrow dirt path flanked by skeletal greasewood bushes. In the distance, silhouetted against a sea of stars, was a building, a small, steeple-topped structure with a sagging roofline. An old, abandoned church. Its bell tower looked like a bony finger pointing at the sky. I had no idea where I was. I checked the map on my phone. I was nearly 7 miles from where I'd parked, 7 miles down a road that wasn't even marked. There was no way I could have driven here in my sleep, not down this track. I would have crashed. I would have woken up. With a trembling hand, I put the key back in the ignition and turned it. The engine hummed back to life as if nothing had happened. I spun the car around, my tires kicking up clouds of dust, and I drove back to the motel, my eyes constantly darting to the steering wheel, half expecting it to move on its own again. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the cheap motel bed, watching the door, listening to the hum of the ice machine down the hall, and trying to convince myself that it had been a dream. A waking nightmare, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and the oppressive solitude of the desert. But in my heart, I knew it wasn't. It was the car, the Bluebird. It had taken me somewhere. And I had the terrible sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. I didn't tell anyone at the diner about it the next morning. I watched the waitress slide a plate of overcooked eggs in front of me and decided, in that second, that silence was a better shield than laughter. Out here, stories travel faster than weather. I could already hear how it would sound if I said it out loud. My classic car took me to church last night. The words turned to ash in my mouth. Instead, I studied the car in the tart sunrise, the pale blue bodywork drinking in the light like skin drinks heat. The windshield held a faint dust patina that wasn't there the day before, a delicate veil of powder as if we'd been out on a godforsaken back road, which of course we had. I traced a curve in it with my finger. The dust smelled metallic and faintly sweet, like old coins kept in a velvet bag. I checked the odometer. It showed 7 additional miles. Exactly 7, not 6.9. not 7.3. The neatness of the number unsettled me more than anything. Machines leave messy signatures, people leave tidy ones. So what did that make the Bluebird? Back in my room, I thumbed through the glove box manual again. There were penciled notes in the margins, small, precise corrections to torque specs and maintenance intervals, each followed by a tiny star. At first, I assumed a meticulous previous owner. Later, I'd wonder if they were instructions from somewhere else, a quiet gospel for the faithful mechanic. That evening, I parked the car facing the motel room door, like a dog that refuses to sleep unless it can see its owner. The key, I told myself, would stay in my pocket. My jacket would stay on the back of the chair. My eyes would stay open. This was resolve repackaged as ritual, the kind people invent when they don't have control, just the performance of it. The wind rose after sunset. It hissed through the dried cholla and set the neon to buzzing, a low electrical moan. Every time the sign flickered, the Bluebird's chrome flashed pink, pink, pink like a slow heartbeat. I found myself timing my breaths to it, a steady inhale on the light, exhale in the dark. I told myself I'd give it one more day, the coward's bargain. One more day to convince myself that fatigue had spun out a hallucination, that desert loneliness had pitched me into a waking dream. People go weird out here. That's the first rule any local will tell you. The second rule is that the weirdness listens when you speak its name. Late-night truckers bellowed past on the far highway, a distant ocean of sound. Somewhere a dog barked twice, and then thought better of it. Every noise took on shape and motive. Every shadow looked like a set of shoulders ready to turn. I washed my hands in the bathroom and watched the water spiral down, trying to imagine all of this slipping away with it. Fear, the church, the instinct that something long and patient had just found me again. It didn't go. Fear is not water-soluble. Before I killed the light, I looked out at the car one last time. The interior was dark, empty, normal. Still, I could swear the driver's seat looked slightly reclined, the way you'd leave it if you'd been stargazing. The vinyl reflected the neon like wet ink. I went to bed and lay on top of the covers, shoes on, as if readiness could save me from purpose. For 2 days, nothing happened. I was a wreck, jumping at every sound, checking on the car every hour through the grimy motel window. I parked it right under the flickering pink light of the dusty star sign, as if the light could keep it docile. I even tried disconnecting the battery one afternoon. I pulled the negative terminal, felt a small sense of victory, and went back to my room. An hour later, I looked out the window and saw the dashboard lights faintly glowing. I went out, popped the hood, and the terminal was reconnected, tightened down harder than I could have managed with my own hands. The metal was cold to the touch. I thought about calling a mechanic, but what would I say? My car goes for joyrides while I'm asleep and apparently repairs itself. They'd think I was crazy. I clung to the idea of sleep driving like a life raft. On the third night, my fragile denial shattered. I was determined not to fall asleep in the car again. After work, I went straight to my room, locked the door, and put the car keys in the bottom of my suitcase, buried under a pile of clothes. I wedged a chair under the doorknob, a flimsy piece of security that made my paranoia feel all the more real. I was going to beat this. I was going to stay in my room and prove it was all in my head. I laid down on the stiff motel bed and tried to read, but the words swam in front of my eyes. The silence of Oak Haven at night is a physical thing. It presses in on you. Sometime after midnight, a strange feeling began to creep over me. It started as a low thrumming in my chest, a weird resonance that seemed to match the idle of a distant engine. Then came the urge. It wasn't a thought, not exactly. It was a physical pull, a deep, cellular craving, like a thirst that water couldn't quench. It was a need to be in the car, so powerful it felt like a biological imperative, like the need to breathe. My muscles ached with the need to stand up, to walk outside, to sit behind that wheel. My own body felt like it was betraying me. I fought it. I curled into a ball, my knuckles white as I gripped the cheap bedspread. The feeling grew stronger, a magnetic pull drawing me toward the door. The thrumming in my chest intensified until my teeth vibrated with it. I knew with a certainty that defied all logic that I wouldn't be able to resist. The Bluebird was calling to me, and I had to answer. I don't remember getting up or opening my suitcase to get the keys. My next clear memory is of the cold night air on my face as I walked across the cracked asphalt of the motel parking lot. The car was there, bathed in the lurid pink glow of the sign. The driver's side door was already slightly ajar, a silent invitation. The keys were in my hand, warm, as if they'd been held for hours. As I slid into the driver's seat, the feeling of compulsion vanished, replaced by a wave of cold, resigned dread. The door closed with a solid, final-sounding thud. I didn't turn the key. I didn't have to. The engine hummed to life on its own, the dashboard lights glowing a soft, eerie green. The car pulled out of the parking lot, its movements impossibly smooth, and headed out of town, away from the last vestiges of light. This time I was wide awake, a prisoner in my own car. I tried the wheel again. It was locked in its course, unmovable. The brakes were still useless. I screamed. I beat my fists against the dashboard. I clawed at the door handle. Nothing. The power locks were engaged and the window cranks wouldn't budge. The car drove on, indifferent to my hysteria. After a few miles, the AM radio crackled to life. It wasn't tuned to any station I knew. It was playing music that sounded like it was from another time. Haunting, melancholic ballads by artists like Patsy Cline and Roy Orbison, songs full of heartache and lonely highways. Between the songs, there was static, and through the static, a voice. It was a man, a preacher by the sound of him, his voice a low, magnetic baritone. He wasn't shouting about fire and brimstone. He was talking about the stars. He spoke of journeys, of conjunctions, of a doorway in the sky that would soon open for the faithful. The heavens are not silent, he whispered through the static. They are a clockwork of divine mathematics, and we are but a breath away from finding the key. The car took me to a new location that night. It pulled off the main road and followed a winding path up into the low hills overlooking the valley. It stopped at the ruins of what looked like an old roadside diner. The roof was gone, and the walls were crumbling, but you could still make out the shape of the counter and the empty frames where windows used to be. The Bluebird parked perfectly in what would have been a parking spot 50 years ago. The engine cut out, the radio went silent, and the doors unlocked. I scrambled out, gasping for breath, and stumbled away from the car, my legs weak. I expected it to vanish or to roar back to life, but it just sat there, silent and still under the starlight, its blue paint looking almost black in the darkness. This became the pattern. Every night the compulsion would rise. I'd find myself walking to the car, and it would take me on a journey. The night after the diner, it took me to a deep, stone-lined well in the middle of a barren field. Another night, it drove high up a mountain pass to a small abandoned observatory, its dome cracked open to the sky like a broken egg. Each location was desolate, forgotten, and each time, the radio would play its ghostly music, and the preacher would talk about the stars. I was an archivist, a professional digger of the past. It was time I started digging into the history of Oakhaven. I had a horrifying suspicion that the answers to where the car was going were buried somewhere in the dusty boxes of the town hall basement. I listened, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The rain had started, a light drizzle that streaked across the windshield. "So you went looking in the archives?" I asked, my voice low. Sarah nodded, her eyes reflecting the passing headlights. "Yes," she said, "and what I found was worse than I ever could have imagined." The third place the Bluebird took me after that was a dry lake bed, flat as glass, its surface crazed with pale hexagons like the skin of some giant reptile. The wind slid across it with no sound at all, a mute hand smoothing a sheet. The car parked with the driver's side facing north. I didn't understand why that mattered until I realized the radio's static was louder when I leaned out that window. The preacher's voice sharpened there, as though the lakebed was a tuned dish and the Montego a receiver. "Every engine is a prayer," he said softly, like he was telling a secret. But most people never learn the words. The dashboard needles quivered, not quite touching their marks, like animals sniffing the air before a storm. The night after, we idled at the mouth of a culvert that carried a seasonal wash under a county road. Bats stitched the dark above us. There the music wasn't Patsy or Roy. It was a woman, alto and warm, humming a lullaby without words. I didn't know the melody, but my chest did. It made my eyes water for a grief I couldn't name. At the diner ruins, I noticed something I had missed. The ghost of a handprint in soot on the cracked tile behind the old counter, fingers splayed wide, as if someone had tried to stand up and couldn't. You tell yourself such marks are old. You tell yourself they're just history with its coat off. That's how you get through the night. After the well, I scraped my knuckles leaning over the stone lip and came away with a smear of black on my skin, tarry as pitch. It took 3 washings to fade, and even then a faint crescent shadow stayed, a mock ring. The smell clung to me until morning, creosote and something like scorched hair. The observatory creaked in the wind, a huge dead mouth half open to the sky. Through the jagged teeth of the dome, the stars were too many. I have never felt so counted. The bluebird parked precisely on a faded circle of paint in the concrete. Someone's old marking for a mount that wasn't there anymore. The old bolts shone like bright coins among the dust. On the 5th night, as we curved up a hill road stitched with yucca, the engine note shifted so subtly I almost missed it. A second vibration accompanied the first, a harmony a half-beat late, like another car traveling exactly with us just out of sight. I peered into the passenger mirror and saw nothing but the mile-eating dark. I tried to open the glove box while we moved. It wouldn't budge, wouldn't even rattle against the latch. When we stopped, it sprang free at the first tug and breathed out a cool breath like the inside of a cave. Inside, the registration papers sat beside a folded highway map of Nevada, whose roads looked slightly wrong, as if redrawn in someone's memory. I began to keep my own notes, penciling times and places in a cheap spiral notebook, drawing little diagrams of where the car parked, angles relative to Polaris, to the moon's path, to the lone cottonwood that survived any water that came. Patterns mean safety. The brain will invent them if it has to. Mine didn't have to invent anything. The pattern was already there, waiting for my hand. On the 7th night, just before the engine died at a ridge that overlooked the valley like a balcony, the preacher's voice said, "Pilgrims go where their feet cannot." The radio clicked off by itself. My hands shook so hard I couldn't write. That was when I knew the investigation had to begin where I was strongest, underground, under fluorescent hum, where paper is heavy and ghosts are light. The Oak Haven Town Archive was my sanctuary during the day, and, I hoped, my armory. It was the one place the car's influence couldn't seem to reach me. Down in that climate-controlled basement, surrounded by the dry, papery scent of history and the low hum of a dehumidifier, I felt grounded. I started my search with a kind of desperate focus. I wasn't just archiving anymore, I was investigating. I set aside the official municipal records and started combing through the uncatalogued boxes, the ones labeled miscellaneous or donations. This is where a town's real secrets are kept, the things people want to forget but can't quite bring themselves to throw away. My first clue came from a box of old photographs from the local newspaper, the Oak Haven Sentinel, which had folded in 1982. The photos were mostly from the early to mid-1970s. I spent hours scrolling through microfiche, the screech of the machine grating on my nerves, my eyes burning from the harsh light. I saw community picnics, high school graduations, the usual small-town fare. But then I found a series of photos of the abandoned church, the first place the car had taken me. In the pictures, it wasn't abandoned at all. It was freshly painted, with a new sign out front that read, "The Starlight Congregation." The letters were painted to look like constellations. The name sent a chill down my spine. The preacher on the radio talking about stars and celestial doorways. It couldn't be a coincidence. I looked closer at the photos. They showed a group of people, maybe 30 or so, standing outside the church. Their faces were serene, beatific, all looking up at the man standing on the church steps as if he were the sun. He was tall, charismatic, with dark, intense eyes and a mane of black hair. The caption identified him as Brother Micah. I spent the rest of the day looking for any mention of him or his congregation. I found them in newspaper clippings. At first, the articles were neutral, even a little curious. They described the congregation as a group of spiritual seekers, who had bought the old church and moved to the area to live a quiet, communal life, focused on astronomy and esoteric theology. Brother Micah was their leader, a man who preached a unique gospel that blended Christian mysticism with cosmology. He taught that God didn't reside in a far-off heaven, but in the stars, and that humanity's true purpose was to return home through a cosmic alignment he called the Grand Conjunction. But as the months went by, the tone of the articles began to change. Reports of strange behavior started to surface. The congregation became more insular, cutting off contact with the town. There were whispers of late-night rituals out in the desert, of members giving all their worldly possessions to Brother Micah, of families being broken apart. The serene seekers were starting to look more like a cult. Then I found it. A group photograph of the congregation, taken inside the church. They were all there, smiling their placid smiles. And in the back row, standing slightly apart from the others, was a young woman with familiar eyes and a cautious, uncertain expression. The caption listed the names. My finger trembled as I traced it to her face. Alara. My great-aunt Alara. My blood ran cold. The woman who had left me the Bluebird had been a member of this cult. The car wasn't just a car. It was a relic, a direct link to this strange and disturbing past I never knew existed. Suddenly, the pristine condition of the car made a terrifying kind of sense. It hadn't just been maintained, it had been preserved. My research became an obsession. I cross-referenced the locations the car had taken me to with old county maps from the period. The derelict diner was marked as the Comet's Tail Cafe. The newspaper archives mentioned it was a regular meeting spot for the congregation in their early days. The stone well was on property that had once been owned by the cult. A brief article mentioned a tragic accident involving a young member there. The observatory on the mountain, I learned, had been built by an eccentric astronomer in the 1930s and was abandoned for decades until Brother Micah and his followers began using it for their nightly celestial observations. The most disturbing discovery came from a box of Alara's personal effects that had been donated to the Town Historical Society after her death. A box the lawyer hadn't known about. It was mostly books on astronomy and strange hand-drawn star charts. Tucked inside a tattered copy of a book about celestial mechanics, I found a small leather-bound journal. Her journal. Her handwriting was neat, precise. The entries started with hope and excitement, describing the profound sense of belonging she felt, her awe at Brother Micah's teachings. He had, she wrote, unlocked the music of the spheres for her. But as the entries progressed, a thread of fear and doubt began to creep in. She wrote about the increasing intensity of the rituals, about Micah's obsession with the coming conjunction. He was no longer just predicting it. He was trying to force it, to create a vessel that could bridge the gap between worlds. In one of the final entries from the fall of 1974, she wrote something that made me drop the journal. Micah grows more certain every day. He says the vessel is nearly complete. He calls it the Chariot of the Steadfast, a machine consecrated by geometry and starlight, perfectly aligned with the ley lines of this valley. It is more than metal and wire. It is a key cut to fit a lock that is not of this world. It must be prepared, he says. It must make the pilgrimage to the holy sites, to absorb their power before the final journey. Most of the others are afraid, but I am not. I helped build it. Its heart is a perfect engine, and its soul is the map of the heavens. He has given me the honor of being its keeper. I will watch over it until the day it is needed. I will keep it ready for the traveler who is to come. A chariot, a machine. My God, she wasn't talking about a spaceship. I looked at the date the entry was written. Then I dug out the car's original title from my glove box. The date of manufacture for the 1974 Mercury Montego, the Bluebird, was just 1 week before that journal entry. It wasn't just a car she had kept for them. It was the vessel. And I, her unwitting descendant, was the traveler she had been waiting for. I pulled the Sentinel's bound volumes and scanned the classifieds, the church notices, the petty civic complaints. Lost dogs, yard sales, bake-offs. The congregation seeped in at the edges first. Requests for telescope donations, announcements about astronomy nights open to the public. Then, like a stain in water, they spread. The librarian, a woman named Bev with nicotine fingers and librarian eyes that saw everything, brought me a shoebox she said belonged to the woman who lived out past 7 Mile Draw, Alara's address. Inside, matchbooks from the Comet's Tail Cafe, each starched stiff with age, a Polaroid of the Montego in front of a mural of the Zodiac, a napkin with precise circles inked on it, and the word radials in the corner. I found a letter to the editor from a man who'd once tried to join the Starlight congregation. He described Brother Micah as gentle with words and blunt with the soul. He lasted 2 weeks. He wrote that they asked him to give up clocks, calendars, and mirrors. "We will tell you when you are," Micah had said. The man left the next day. A maintenance log from the town's short-lived radio station listed a strange complaint in 1974. Unwanted bleed-through on the AM band after midnight on clear nights, content, religious in tone, not sourced from any known station. The engineer wrote that he traced the interference to a temporary antenna erected north-northwest of town, elevation 5,800 feet. The tower vanished the following week. Alara's journal began to feel like a hand on my sleeve, tugging. Between entries about spherical harmonics and tempered intervals, she had doodled cars. Not many, just 3. All front grills with long horizontal bars like teeth. Under one, she'd written, "Steady heart, tuned lungs." I photocopied Brother Micah's best photo and tacked it above my workstation. The more I looked, the more those eyes stopped being charismatic and started being tired. Not morally tired, cosmically tired. It is a peculiar, nauseating feeling to stare into the face of a man who has waited for a door so long he can no longer tell which side he stands on. The zoning ledgers showed parcel transfers that made no economic sense. Land traded in rings, lots swapped in precise arcs that, when overlaid on a county map, suggested a geometry not meant for humans, but for instruments. If you drew a line from each site to the next, the path curled like a nautilus. Bev told me, voice lowered though we were alone. The congregation bought fuel by the drum, cash. Sometimes after midnight, a caravan of cars would glide through town with headlights off, the engines so perfectly tuned they sounded like a single note. Oakhaven pretended not to hear. You learn to survive by practicing ignorance until it becomes a virtue. I looked up Alara's DMV photo. She met the camera the way you meet weather. Squinting, resolute. The record showed she renewed the Montego's registration every year. No lapses, no tickets. Somewhere between those clean renewals, there should have been ordinary life. Trips, friends, lovers, groceries. There wasn't. The ledger of her days was a straight line to a horizon I couldn't see. When I turned off the microfiche and sat in the humming dark, I finally understood why the car's radio played what it played. It wasn't nostalgia, it was calibration. Heartbreak at 4/4 time, triplets for the miles, music as metronome for intention. The Bluebird didn't want companionship, it wanted tempo. My world tilted on its axis. I was sitting on the cold concrete floor of the archive, the smell of dust and decay filling my lungs, but I felt like I was floating in a cold, dark void. The car I had been driving, the car that had felt like a quirky classic inheritance, was a piece of ritualistic machinery, a consecrated vessel for a long-dead desert cult. My great-aunt Alara hadn't been just a member, she had been its keeper. And now, that duty had somehow passed to me. The weight of that realization was suffocating. This wasn't just a haunting, it was a legacy. I stayed in the archive until well after dark, poring over Alara's journal and every other scrap of information I could find about the congregation. The main lights were off, and the only illumination came from the green-tinged screen of the microfiche reader, casting long, dancing shadows that made the dusty shelves look like ancient ruins. I had to understand. What was this grand conjunction? What was the final journey? What happened to them? The answers were in a set of moldering ledgers I found at the bottom of a box marked Oakhaven Zoning Disputes. It seemed an unlikely place, but tucked between complaints about property lines were the congregation's private records. They must have been seized by the county at some point. No one had likely looked at them in 50 years. They were filled with Brother Micah's handwriting, a flamboyant, looping script. He wrote not like a preacher, but like an engineer drafting a mad blueprint. He described the Grand Conjunction as a rare celestial alignment, a moment when the planets and a distant, unnamed star would form a perfect syzygy, creating what he called a gravitational resonance that would temporarily thin the veil between dimensions. This wasn't about ascending to a spiritual heaven, it was about physically crossing over to another place. A new world, as he called it, unspoiled and waiting. The ritual to open this door was terrifyingly specific. It wasn't about prayer or sacrifice in the traditional sense. It was about energy. He believed that certain locations on Earth acted as nodes or acupuncture points on the planet's electromagnetic field. By performing specific actions at these nodes in a precise sequence, in tune with the celestial alignment, one could accumulate enough energy to create a stable gateway. I made a list of the locations he mentioned. The church, for its symbolic power. The diner, a place of fellowship and shared intent. The well, a place of sorrowful sacrifice that he believed created a deep psychic wound in the earth, a wound that could be harnessed. The observatory, the point of contact with the heavens. They were the exact places the Bluebird had been taking me. My nightly drives weren't random. They were a systematic, ritualistic activation of these power centers. Then I found the account of what happened. On the night of the conjunction, back in October of 1974, the entire cult gathered at a final secret location, a place Micah called the Altar, deep in the salt flats west of Oakhaven. They believed the vessel, the Bluebird, was ready. But according to Micah's frantic scrawled final entry, something went wrong. The alignment was impure. A novice had miscalculated the trajectory of a comet, an unforeseen variable that had poisoned the celestial harmony. The gateway didn't open, but something came through. The writing here became almost illegible, the pen strokes digging into the paper. He didn't describe what it was. He only wrote of a cacophony from the void, of a presence that unraveled the mind. He wrote that the sky screamed with geometry, and the desert floor writhed with impossible angles. The last coherent sentence in the ledger read, "We are lost. The door is closed, but the watcher remains. The vessel is dormant, but its purpose is unchanged. It will wait for the next alignment. It will wait for the blood of the keeper to awaken it." After that night, the Starlight congregation vanished. The newspaper archives reported them all as missing persons. The official story was that they had packed up and left in the middle of the night. But the locals knew better. There were whispers that they had simply walked out into the desert and were never seen again. Now I knew why. They hadn't walked. They had been taken, or erased, by whatever had come through that door. All except one. Ilara. There was a final tear-stained entry in her journal, dated a week after the disappearance. "They are gone. Micah was wrong. The watcher he spoke of is not a guardian. It is a predator. It took them all. I was spared only because I was not at the altar. He sent me away, told me my duty was to the vessel, to protect it. I am alone now, and the silence is a scream. I will do as he asked. I will wait." For 50 years she had fulfilled her duty. She had kept the vessel safe, pristine, waiting. And when she died, she passed it on to the only family she had left. Her blood. Me. I felt sick. This wasn't an inheritance. It was a curse. A 50-year-old trap had just been sprung, and I had walked right into it. The Bluebird wasn't just a car with a ghost in the machine. It was the machine itself, a finely tuned instrument designed for a single terrifying purpose. And my presence, my DNA, my blood, had awakened it. It was finishing the ritual that had failed half a century ago. A horrifying thought struck me. I pulled out my phone and, with shaking fingers, searched for an astronomy app, a star charting program. I entered the current date and my location in the Nevada desert. I started searching for celestial alignments, for planetary conjunctions. My breath hitched in my throat. According to the app, a rare alignment was occurring. Not the same one from 1974, but one involving several planets and a deep space object that had only recently been discovered. An alignment that was reaching its perfect apex. Tonight, the nightly drives hadn't just been a pilgrimage. They had been a countdown, and the countdown was about to hit zero. I went back to the well at noon, hoping sunlight could sand the edges off the fear. Daylight did nothing. The wind moved in little square gusts, unnatural, as if pushing around invisible scaffolding. My shadow broke in odd places, a jigsaw of light that didn't fit the ground beneath it. On the ledger's last pages lay a diagram that would have looked like a nonsense star to anyone else, a tangle of lines and nodes arranged around a central circle labeled hinge. The nodes matched my list. The hinge lay in the salt flats, exactly where my stomach said it would be. In the margins, Micah had written, "Every gate is a promise in reverse." I searched county death records for 1974 and found none for the congregation. No graves, no certificates, just a cluster of departed, unknown destination notations that bureaucrats use when the living become inconvenient. Horror and paperwork are cousins. Outside the town hall, a thunderhead shaped like a cathedral piled itself from nothing and then unbuilt itself in 5 minutes. I felt watched in the way you feel watched when a canyon's echo returns your own breath. The Watcher, Alara had written. The word made the world seem tall and me very small. I tried to call my mother. The line rang without sound, each ring a dry cough, and when she answered, her voice had the underwater quality of a dream. I almost told her everything. Instead, I said I loved her and asked if she had any stories about Great Aunt Alara. "Oh, honey," she said, "some doors close for a reason." The line clicked once, like a tongue against teeth, and went dead. Back in the basement, the fluorescent light stuttered a rhythm I recognized only after a long minute. It matched the idle hum of the Montego. I turned off the light. The hum kept going for 3 more seconds in the dark, as if embarrassed to be caught. I laid out the matchbooks and drew lines between addresses. The resulting shape, when rotated 90 degrees, resembled the Montego's grill. A coincidence so on the nose I nearly laughed. But cults love correspondence. They build their faith on it the way gamblers build systems out of coin flips. Near dusk, I drove a borrowed county pickup to the abandoned church, seeking control by moving under my own power. Inside, the floorboards sang with the faintest resonance when I walked from door to altar, a sympathetic vibration like breath held by a choir you couldn't see. I left in a hurry, feeling impolite, as if I'd walked in on someone praying to a god that learns your name before you do. Back at the motel, a pamphlet had been slid under my door. No one admitted leaving it. On the front, an engraving of Jacob's ladder. Inside, a schedule of observations from September to October 1974, a set of star charts, a single typed line. "We do not ascend by leaving, only by aligning." The paper smelled faintly of rain on hot asphalt. When the astronomy app showed me the alignment peaking tonight, something in me unclenched and then immediately clenched harder, like a fist that had found its purpose. I stood very still, feeling the apartment of my bones rearrange itself around that fact. The Watcher remained. The vessel was awake. And I was no longer just reading history. I was the paragraph that made the footnote make sense. Panic is a cold, sharp thing. It cuts through all the denial, all the rationalizations, and leaves you with the raw, shivering truth of your situation. I was the key to a cosmic horror ritual I didn't understand, and my chariot was waiting for me in the motel parking lot, sitting patiently under the buzzing pink neon. The final alignment was happening tonight. The car was going to complete its pilgrimage, and it was going to take me with it. I bolted from the archive, leaving the dusty ledgers and Alara's journal scattered on the floor like fallen leaves. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. Away from Oakhaven. Away from the Bluebird. I ran through the deserted streets of the town, my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the twilight quiet. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in fiery, apocalyptic colors. The sky already felt wrong, heavy, expectant, like the air before a storm. My motel room was no sanctuary. It was a cage, a waiting room. I burst through the door, grabbed my wallet and my jacket, not even thinking about my laptop or the rest of my clothes, and ran out the back. My plan, if you could call it that, was simple and stupid. I was going to run. I was going to get to the highway and hitch a ride just like I did with you, Jack. I was going to put as many miles between me and that car as humanly possible. The highway was a 2-lane strip of blacktop that cut straight through the desert, disappearing into the curvature of the earth. There was no one on it. The emptiness that I had once found so peaceful now felt predatory. I started walking, half jogging, my eyes fixed on the darkening horizon, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. Each distant shimmer of heat looked like approaching headlights. I made it maybe a mile. Then I heard it. It was a low, familiar hum coming from behind me, a sound that vibrated deep in my chest. I didn't need to turn around. I knew what it was. I kept walking, faster now, my fists clenched. It's just a car, I told myself, over and over, my voice a pathetic whisper against the vast silence. It can't hurt you out here, just a machine. But it wasn't just a machine. Two beams of light cut through the gloom, pinning me in their glare. My shadow stretched out impossibly long in front of me, a dark, spindly giant. I stopped, my shoulders slumping in defeat. Slowly, I turned. The Bluebird was about 100 feet away, idling in the middle of the road. Its engine was a soft, purring thrum. It wasn't menacing. It was patient. It just sat there, waiting for me. I screamed at it, a raw, desperate sound torn from my throat. "Leave me alone." The only response was the soft click of the driver's side door unlocking and swinging open. An invitation. Tears of frustration and terror streamed down my face. I turned and ran again, this time leaving the pavement and scrambling into the scrubby desert terrain. The ground was uneven, covered in loose rock and thorny bushes that tore at my clothes. The car followed. It didn't speed up or try to run me down. It just matched my pace, gliding over the rough ground as smoothly as it had on the asphalt, its suspension making no sound, its headlights bobbing gently, keeping me perfectly illuminated. It was hurting me, cutting off my angles, guiding me away from the highway deeper into the wilderness. I stumbled and fell, my hands scraping against the gravelly soil. I lay there, panting, defeated. The car rolled to a stop a few feet away, its engine humming its constant, calming, terrible song. The light from its headlamps was warm, almost comforting. The open door beckoned. I knew then that I couldn't escape. It was tied to me, or I was tied to it. Ilara's blood, Ilara's legacy. It was an obligation I couldn't outrun. The compulsion I'd felt in the motel room returned, but this time it wasn't a frantic pull. It was a gentle, resigned sense of inevitability. This was my purpose. This was the journey Ilara had kept the vessel ready for. I got to my feet, brushed the dust from my jeans, and walked towards the car. I didn't feel like I was surrendering. I felt like I was keeping an appointment made for me 50 years ago. As I slid into the driver's seat, the door swung shut beside me with a quiet final thud. The interior was filled with a soft green light from the dashboard, and the air felt thick, electric. I could taste copper in the back of my throat. I didn't touch the wheel. I didn't touch the pedals. The car pulled away, not back towards the highway, but deeper into the desert, following a path that wasn't there. The AM radio crackled to life. The haunting music began to play, but this time it was different. It was clearer, and beneath the melody, there was a faint, rhythmic pulsing sound, like a distant heartbeat. Then, Brother Micah's voice came through the static. It wasn't a recording. I knew it instantly. The cadence, the tone was the same, but there was aliveness to it, a presence that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. He was speaking to me. "The path is cleared," his voice whispered from the speaker, a sound that was both intimate and as vast as the sky. "The Keeper's blood has awakened the chariot. Your fear is a shadow traveler. Let it pass. The stars are aligned. The Watcher is waiting. Do not be afraid. You are coming home." I looked up through the windshield. The stars were out, but they were wrong. The constellations were twisted into unfamiliar shapes, and a strange, sickly green nebula was visible near the horizon, a celestial wound in the fabric of the night. The Bluebird was picking up speed, gliding silently and swiftly across the salt flats, heading directly for that eerie light. The final marker on a map I was never meant to see. As we sliced deeper into the basin, ghost mirages of water appeared and vanished, thin silver lies lying a half-inch above the salt. The Bluebird skated toward them without ever touching, as if the car preferred promises to roads. The heartbeat under the music grew louder, Not through the speakers, but through the frame. A slow thud that traveled clavicle to wrist, wrist to fingertips, fingertips to chrome. My breath adjusted without permission, lungs learning a new cadence that wasn't mine. "Do you know us yet?" Micah asked, his voice braided into the noise, tender as a hospice nurse. I didn't answer, but silence is an answer in places like that. A breeze found its way through the vents smelling of rewarmed dust and ozone, the scent of a TV just switched on. The sky in the far west crawled with a faint grid-like shimmer, squares sliding over squares, a mesh overlaying on the world. It reminded me of the microfiche reader, the way images snapped into focus only when the plate clicked into an exact position. I had the stupid thought that the flats were a lens and we were the eye. I tried to reach for the door handle then. Reflex, panic, rebellion, whatever scrap of mammal wiring still shouted at me to flee. The lock button lifted under my thumb and then, politely, pushed itself back down, gentle as a friend moving a drink away from you when you've had enough. Somewhere overhead, a meteor burned a wordless sentence across the black, a punctuation mark no grammar knows. Instead of awe, I felt recognition, the way a dog cocks its head at a whistle only it can hear. The preacher's voice softened. "You are the last mile." He didn't say I was special. He didn't say chosen. He said mile, and the word lanced me with its banal exactness. I was a unit of measurement, the human portion of a mechanical devotion. In the glass of the speedometer, a reflection swam that wasn't mine. Not a face. Faces are easy. This was the suggestion of someone sitting beside me, shoulder to shoulder, both of us staring ahead like children on a long trip. For a few breaths, I felt less alone and hated the feeling for its treachery. The flats pitched up almost imperceptibly, the way the ocean swells ahead of a distant storm. The car compensated with small corrections I could feel more than see, each one a musician's fingers on fret and string, keeping pitch while the world detuned around us. When the light finally loomed, not like a beacon but like an arrival, something inside me eased, the way a key relaxes when it finds the lock's throat. That ease scared me more than everything that came before. Will can be stolen by terror. Complicity has to be warmed into you. The salt flats were like driving across the surface of the moon, a vast white featureless plain under a sky of alien stars. The bluebird moved with a silent, relentless purpose, the hum of its engine the only sound in the universe. I wasn't driving. I wasn't even a passenger. I was cargo. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching a movie of my own life. The green nebula on the horizon grew larger, brighter. It wasn't a nebula. It was a light. A shimmering vertical tear in the darkness, pulsing with a soft, nauseating energy. It looked like an aurora borealis, but it was anchored to the ground, a curtain of impossible color hanging in the desert night. This was it. The altar. The gateway. Brother Micah's voice continued to whisper from the radio, a constant soothing litany that threatened to lull me into a state of calm acceptance. He spoke of the world we were leaving behind, a world of decay, of pain, of broken things. He spoke of the world we were going to, a place of perfect symmetry, of timeless existence, where thought and reality were one. "They have waited so long," he whispered, his voice resonating in the very frame of the car. "They have been patient. You are the final piece, the living catalyst that will stabilize the connection. You will anchor them, and in return, you will share in their eternity." They weren't dead, he explained. They were just adrift, waiting for a tow. And I was it. My terror had subsided, burned away by a kind of awe-filled dread. I was witnessing something impossible, something that broke every law of physics and reason. I thought of Alara, living out her quiet, lonely life in this valley, a sentinel guarding this terrible secret. Did she know this would be my fate? Or did she hope that in passing it to me, she was somehow setting me free? Her journal entry came back to me. "I will keep it ready for the traveler who is to come." But she hadn't been waiting for a savior. She had been waiting for a replacement. As we grew closer, I could see figures in the shimmering light, silhouettes distorted and elongated, like heat haze rising from asphalt. They weren't moving, just standing there waiting. The starlight congregation, my great aunt's flock, preserved for half a century in some liminal space between worlds. The car began to slow, its headlights dimming as if in deference to the otherworldly glow ahead. It rolled to a perfect stop about 100 yards from the shimmering curtain of light. The engine cut out. For a long moment there was only silence. Even the voice on the radio had fallen quiet. Then, the door on my side clicked open. My time was up. I didn't want to go. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stay in the car, to lock the doors, to hide. But I knew it was useless. This was the end of the line. Brother Micah's voice returned, no longer from the radio, but from everywhere at once. It was in my head, a calm, commanding whisper. Emerge, traveler. Your journey is over. Your true life is about to begin. I took one last look around the interior of the Bluebird. The green glow of the dash, the faint smell of vinyl, the chrome details on the steering wheel. This strange, beautiful, terrifying machine that had been my prison and my inheritance. I stepped out onto the salt flats. The air was cold and still, and it hummed with a low-level static that made my teeth ache. The light from the gateway washed over me, and it felt thin, like the world I knew was losing its substance. The silhouettes of the congregation wavered, and for a second I thought I saw one of them raise a hand in welcome. And then I ran. It was a stupid, pointless, purely instinctual act of defiance. It wasn't a plan. It was a spasm of survival. I didn't run towards the light. I ran away from it, parallel to it, out into the crushing darkness of the salt flats where the gateway's light couldn't reach. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. I didn't look back. I expected to hear the car start up again, to see its headlights pursue me. I expected to feel a hand on my shoulder or hear Micah's voice in my head, commanding me to stop. But nothing happened. The silence was absolute. After what felt like an eternity, I collapsed, exhausted, onto the salty ground. I lay there, waiting for the end. When I finally found the courage to look, the light was gone. The alien stars were gone. The car was gone. The sky was just the sky again, a familiar blanket of stars over the Nevada desert. There was no sign that anything had ever happened. It was as if I had dreamed the entire thing. I walked for the rest of the night, following the North Star. By dawn, I hit the highway. A trucker picked me up. I told him I'd had car trouble. I think he believed me. I never went back to Oak Haven. I left my equipment, my belongings, everything. I just disappeared. Sarah fell silent. The only sounds were the hum of my engine and the rhythmic slap of the wipers against the rain-slicked glass. We were nearing the edge of town, the first streetlights beginning to appear through the mist. So, the car, it just vanished? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She gave a small, sad smile, her eyes fixed on something far down the road. I thought it did. For a while, I almost convinced myself I had suffered some kind of breakdown out there. Post-traumatic stress mixed with exhaustion. But then, a few months later, I started seeing it. In the corner of my eye, when I'm walking down the street in a new city, parked on a distant corner under a streetlight, a flash of sky blue in my rearview mirror on an empty road. It's never close. It's just there, watching, waiting. Her voice dropped, filled with a chilling certainty. The ritual wasn't completed. I ran. I broke the circuit. The gateway closed. But the vessel is still here, and it's still bound to me. It hasn't given up. It's just waiting for the next alignment. It's waiting for me to get back in. Sometimes at night when it's very quiet, I can feel it, you know? That low hum deep in my bones calling to me. I pulled up to a desolate crossroads, the intersection she'd pointed to on the map. It was nothing but a blinking yellow light and darkness in all four directions. "Here is fine," she said, her voice soft. I looked at her, at the deep, haunted weariness in her eyes. "What are you going to do?" "Keep moving," she said, opening the door and stepping out into the damp night. "He's still out there adrift. So are the others. And the car. The car is patient. It can wait a long time. But sooner or later, everyone needs a ride home." She closed the door and walked away without looking back, melting into the fog under the lonely blinking light. When I first broke into a run, the flats answered with a hiss, salt grinding under my soles like a whisper trying to keep up. I didn't run well. I ran like a person who'd forgotten how and was relearning while their life depended on it. The stars smeared into a cold lace above me. Behind me, the bluebird didn't move. Or if it did, it moved in that sideways way certain nightmares do. Always in the corner of your sight line, never in the center, a superstition of motion. I refused to look. Looking acknowledges. Not looking can sometimes starve a thing. The air grew colder the farther I got, the temperature dropping in exhale steps, each breath a little knife. My chest burned, my side stitched. Somewhere inside that pain, an old cathedral bell swung. Keep going, keep going, keep. The light throbbed twice and then guttered, pulling the world in around itself like a drawstring bag. For a heartbeat, I stood at the lip of nothing, a negative space that hummed with rules I didn't understand. Then night snapped shut. The ordinary stars returned, embarrassed, like hosts realizing they'd grossly overprepared. I didn't collapse so much as fold, each joint making a small decision to quit. The salt leached heat and hope. I spoke out loud to hear a human voice. The words were nonsense, childhood prayers misremembered and glued together with curses. When I finally turned, the place where the gateway had been was empty, save for a seam in the darkness, a crease like paper once folded and then smoothed. If I walked over it, I thought, would my foot catch? Would I trip over something that wasn't there anymore? Hours later, or minutes, time went threadbare. I saw the delta of the highway and wept because straight lines mean choices. The first set of headlights that found me belonged to a man who smelled of coffee and axle grease and didn't ask the kind of questions strangers often think they are owed. At the truck stop where he dropped me, the vending machines flickered as if unsure about what world they were in. I pressed my forehead to cool glass and stared past candy bars at my ghost reflection. My face looked like someone else had drawn it from memory. I slept in a booth with a Formica pillow and woke to a morning that didn't forgive anything. The salt had dried in my eyebrows, a pale rime. When I went outside, a freshly washed sedan idled by the pumps. For a second, its paint caught the sky and went the exact color of the bluebird. Then a cloud moved, and it was just a car. I didn't go back for my belongings because the story had already collected them in its mouth, and I wasn't going to reach in after. You don't reclaim things from a tide. You learn to live with what it takes, and you count yourself lucky the first time it leaves you standing. I sat there for a long time after she was gone, the engine idling, the wipers keeping their lonely rhythm. The blinking yellow light of the crossroads painted the inside of my cab in pulses of amber and shadow. Sarah's story settled into the quiet corners of the truck, a new ghost to ride along with me. I've heard a lot of tales on these roads. Stories of regret, of lost love, of strange sights in the deep woods. But this one was different. It felt older, vaster. It had the weight of the cosmos behind it. I finally put the truck in gear and drove on, heading for a 24-hour diner a few towns over. The rain had let up, but the fog still clung to the hollows. As I drove, I couldn't stop thinking about the bluebird. A machine built with a purpose so far beyond its own steel and glass that it had become something else entirely. A key, a chariot, a predator. At the diner, I ordered a black coffee and sat in a booth by the window watching the empty highway. The place was nearly deserted, just me and a tired-looking waitress. The old radio behind the counter was playing softly, some forgotten ballad from decades ago. I found myself listening to the static between the songs, half expecting to hear a low, magnetic voice talking about the stars. I saw a newspaper on the counter, a few days old. A small article on an inner page caught my eye. It was about a series of unexplained atmospheric phenomena reported by amateur astronomers over the Nevada basin. Strange lights, radio interference. Officials called it solar flares. I knew better. When I got back in my truck, the coffee doing little to warm the chill that had settled deep inside me, I checked my rearview mirror before pulling out. The parking lot was empty, save for my rig. But for a heartbeat, just a fraction of a second, I thought I saw a flicker of light reflect off a chrome bumper at the far end of the lot. A glint of something sky blue half hidden in the fog. I blinked, and it was gone. It was probably just a trick of the light, my mind playing games after her story. But on these roads late at night, you learn that some stories don't have an ending. They just have the long, dark drive that comes after. And as I drove on into the fading night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, not by another truck, but by a story. And I had the distinct sense that Sarah wasn't the only one the Bluebird was waiting for. It was waiting for anyone who was lost, anyone who was running, anyone who needed a ride home. The waitress topped off my coffee without asking and said, "Storm up in the passes." Like that explained the static on the radio, the prickling on my scalp. Maybe it did. Some storms run along the ground, some walk on their hind legs across the sky. I unfolded the paper again, tracing the meteor reports with a fingertip the way a believer touches relic glass. Each note was small, precise, bloodless. Language has a way of draining the color out of the unexplainable until it's fit to print. At a corner table, a lineman on night shift stirred his soup in slow circles, not eating, staring through the window as if the dark could answer him back. When he caught me looking, he nodded once. There is a fraternity among those who work while the world pretends to sleep. Back on the road, the fog lay in long scarves between the pines, and now and then the truck's beams unraveled a pair of eyes low to the ground. Coyotes, deer, something that might have been a dog and might have been a shadow practicing being a dog. I turned the dial to AM for company. For a minute I got a baseball game 2 states away, the announcer's voice cheerful and unafraid. Then the signal slipped, and the gap between stations widened into a valley. In that valley, I thought I heard someone humming. It might have been the engine. It might have been me. On a turnout above a river, I pulled over and let the engine idle. The sound filled the cab like warm water. I thought about the woman with dessert on her boots and star charts in her blood, and wondered what the word home meant in her mouth now. Some people mean a place. Some mean a person. Some mean a direction no map bothers to draw. The newspaper slid off the passenger seat and landed face up. A horoscope column grinned at me, planetary arrows and cheerful lies. I've never met a star that cared what any of us did. I've met plenty of people who did, and that's stranger. A semi rolled past going the other way, its chrome briefly turning my windshield into a funhouse of light. In that warped flash, a silhouette sat beside me, hands folded, profile mild, the posture of someone waiting their turn to speak. The light spun on, and the seat was empty. It always is, until it isn't. I eased back onto the highway and let the wheels do their catechism in the seams of the asphalt. The world smelled like rain that had forgotten where to fall. Somewhere ahead, a crossroad blinked yellow into nobody. Somewhere behind, a sky blue Patience checked its mirrors and matched my pace. I didn't see Sarah again that night. People like her slip into towns the way weather does. Arrive, ruin your plans, leave you talking about it for years. But as the miles unspooled and the fog grew thin, I realized I was listening for a new sound in the engine, an extra half-beat late, a harmony you only hear when you've learned the melody of being followed. Out here, on the long dark, some rides end. The road goes on. And if a sky blue shape sidles into your lane one night, if an old song strikes a tuning fork in your ribs, do yourself a kindness. Don't ask if it's real. Ask if it's patient.